For me, the most exciting thing about being at the Royal Institution, I nearly said Royal Society, didn't I? The most exciting thing about being at the Royal Institution is this amazing funnel-shaped lecture theatre, where you, the audience, look down on us. We have to look up to you. And also you can see each other. So I'm hoping to really utilise that today. So this debate won't just be about you listening to these very clever, thoughtful people that we have on stage, but also about listening to each other and having a bit of a conversation in the round and really pulling out the huge amount of expertise and ideas that I know is in this room. And I'm looking forward to finding out new people that I haven't heard about before as well and hearing what you've got to say. So in a moment, I will let Alok tell you a bit about today's event. Then these two will speak. We've got some other invited people to help us digest it. And then I really am going to get you lot to speak, and I'm going to get these people to shut up. So I hope you're all ready for that. Let me introduce Alok Jha, whose idea this whole event was, and he will tell you a bit about the background.
Thanks, Alice. That intro was a bit like being introduced saying, "This is Jazz Odyssey. He wrote this." It's, if Spinal Tap fans will get that. That's right. Yeah, my name is Alok Jha. I'm a science correspondent at the Guardian newspaper, and I'm really amazed that so many people are interested to come to this event. I thought about 50 people would turn up, and I'd have to invite them all and pay for their train tickets, but here you all are. I'm going to do a really quick intro, just so that these guys can get straight to the meat of what we're hoping to discuss this evening, and not have to go through any of this sort of back history. Well, it started, as so many things do nowadays, with a buzz in the blogosphere. On Twitter, something was up. Whether or not it was the cause, there was a post by David Kroll, a pharmacologist in North Carolina, and author of the Take as Directed blog, where he was posing an intriguing question to health and science reporters. He asked, how do you negotiate the slope of prospectively sharing article content with scientist sources? In real life, he speaks much more eloquently than that. Now, I followed the comment thread on this post, which had American, British journalists, all sorts, reacting with, I followed it with some surprise, actually. For journalists, it's something you learn pretty much straight out of school. You keep your distance from a source, and you don't let them see what you're publishing beforehand. It just isn't done. I thought the discussion would kind of fizzle out as people sort of pointed this out, and it wasn't going to go much forward than that. Step forward, Ananyo here, who's going to speak. We commissioned him on the Guardian blog to basically write what I've just said. This is normal standard journalistic practice. This is how we behave, and this is how we're going to behave as science reporters. His message to scientists who were asking to copy check stuff was just a simple no. And if you didn't get that, he said no. So far, so obvious to me. Chris Chambers then got in touch. Here he is. A few weeks later, he and colleagues had written some interesting pieces for us before, analysing media coverage of science. So I had a lot of time for his thoughts, and I thought he proposed a slightly different article. He said that he proposed something that seemed to go right against my personal journalistic sort of sensibilities. He said that yes, the press should be free, but science was a bit different. There were some crucial differences. Science was not the same as the type of political subjects that standard adversarial news journalism had been built to cover. There was internal checking, peer review, and unlike politics, there were no organised party lines that we necessarily needed to be wary of. Scientists, he would later say, are as difficult to herd as cats. I can't say I wholeheartedly agreed with the conclusions of Chris's piece, but that was no reason not to publish. And then all hell broke loose. Multiple blog posts appeared in the following days from around the world, which vociferously defended or attacked each nuance of each speaker's article. These rich comment threads were filled with journalists, scientists, press and information officers giving their 2 pennies. And let's face it, a lot of insults flew around about who was to blame for bad media coverage of science. Now, as is usual amongst these things, the blogger, a freelance journalist, and pajama wearer Ed Yong wrote that this infighting was counterproductive. Here we had good journalists, he said, arguing with good scientists, while the people who really made all the errors and mistakes that everyone was complaining about, well, they were down the pub. And he was kind of right. I thought that maybe there was an opportunity. The articles, tweets, and blog posts in response to Chris Chambers' words had me thinking, do lots of other academics feel the same way about copy checking and this specialness of science? especially those perhaps who don't deal so much with the media. It was something worth highlighting and addressing. And what about the media themselves? Typically on media training courses, scientists are told that although the system of journalism is not perfect, that scientists should just learn to get used to it and use it to their best advantage. But as Fiona Fox, Chief Executive of the Science Media Centre, said in evidence to Lord Justice Leveson recently, now is a rare and opportune moment to challenge that bit of media training, to sit back and reflect on the way media really works in relation to science. Are there systematic flaws in journalism or amongst the work that press officers do, which could do with some attention? The core issue, it seems to me, might be solved by a better understanding of motives. Scientists and journalists want different things from science, hence the title of the debate. Scientists want peer-reviewed papers and attempts to better understand nature. Journalists just want stories. It's a bit simplistic, but it's about right. In fact, as the science journalist David Dobbs recently said at a conference, actually all of us want stories, we just weave our different ones from scientific information. My main hope for this evening is that we, let's ostensibly call ourselves the people who care, can move beyond the pettiness and the finger-pointing to try and look at whether there is any genuine, useful debate on how journalists, press officers, and scientists do what they do. If there are suggestions for improvement while still allowing everyone to maintain their core principles, then let's hear them. I'm not promising that there's going to be any answers. Maybe we'll end up with just more questions. All I can hope is that we can be as constructive as possible. And if we do move the debate onto somewhere constructive tonight, it means I can rescue a colleague of mine, who I won't name, from insanity. This person is so fed up of this whole finger-pointing argument that they keep threatening to smash delicate bits of their anatomy in fridge doors whenever the subject of how science is covered by the media is raised. If we don't do it for anything else, let's do it for that.
Right, well, to start us off with our debate, to provoke you, to offer some questions and some thoughts that they've been thinking about for a while, that they've written about in The Guardian, that they've had conversations off the back of that through The Guardian comments and elsewhere. We're going to start off with Chris Chambers from the University of Cardiff, and I think you've got some stuff you can actually present to us.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Alice. Good evening, everyone. I was warned before coming on tonight, this could be me if I say the wrong thing, so I'm just going to leave him here as a little reminder. So what, if anything, can scientists do to help improve the quality of science journalism? And you might think perhaps not very much, because science journalism ultimately is controlled by journalists, by editors, by media corporations, not by scientists. So our job this evening really is to try and convince you that, in fact, there are a number of fairly straightforward measures that scientists could put into play that would improve the quality of science journalism by focusing on that part of the pipeline between scientists in the lab collecting data and public consumer of the media that we can actually do something about, that we have some control over. So you will have been familiar with our Guardian piece that we published last week, which proposed 9 possible ways scientists could help improve the quality of science journalism. These are ways scientists can change their own behaviour to improve the quality of news, and also 9 possible questions for journalists. And because we're nerds and we really like data, we decided to run a kind of back-of-the-envelope survey as well on how scientists view the media and also their own press releases, as a way of providing an insight perhaps into some of the perceptions of scientists. And I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. So based on the feedback that we got from Guardian readers and from other discussions, our first recommendation to scientists is that we should watch what we release. And in particular, I'm talking about press releases. 3 little facts that you may or may not know. First, most science news, about 70% or more, is estimated to begin its life with a press release. And it's been shown that the quality of a press release is very important for determining the quality of the subsequent news reports that come. And in such a way that any errors or hyperbole that are introduced into a press release could potentially account for a significant amount of misreporting or inaccurate news out there. And it's been estimated, in fact, that this could explain up to 50% of faulty news reporting. So we actually asked our scientists what they thought of their own press releases. And a majority were actually quite happy and said, look, 63% said, look, our press releases are not exaggerated, they're fine, they're accurate. But a substantial minority, 37%, admitted to some degree of exaggeration in their press releases. And this gives us pause to think, what can we do about this part of the pie? What can we do perhaps to change our own behaviour to improve this situation? So our specific recommendations for scientists are that press releases obviously have to be interesting and engaging, but they should always stay within the peer-reviewed conclusions and implications of the research. That we also recommend including a section, what this study does not show, specifically in every press release, which would highlight key caveats and danger points in interpretation, where, for example, a reader might confuse correlation with causation or absolute and relative risks. And also, we recommend the inclusion of a section which anticipates perhaps the likely angle in which a journalist might frame the work based upon the social or political context in which the work is being conducted or has been released to the media. So doing all of this really means that we have to, as scientists, accept that we are ultimately accountable for the quality of our press releases, the quality of the work that we introduce into the public domain. And this is not in any way, and I want to stress this is not in any way to demonise or marginalise the excellent work that press officers do. It's simply to accept the fact that as scientists, the buck stops with us in terms of our press releases. Our second recommendation is blogging. Now, blogging is increasingly recognised as a fantastic way for scientists to reach the public, but critically also, it's a way of us reaching journalists and providing journalists with additional information and resources. In fact, a recent Nature magazine survey concluded that about 50% of science journalists have used scientists' blogs in determining the direction or shape of news stories. So we recommend really that scientists should use their blogs to summarise research for journalists, to offer critiques on other scientific debates, for example, to provide behind-the-scenes insights into how science works. And in doing so, we can work towards humanising scientists and demystifying the scientific method. So this has a lot of benefits, I think, and so our recommendation here is that scientists should blog more, and in particular, to increase the impact of those blogs, we can link to them from our official PR material. So for example, a press release could contain a link to a blog article that refers or provides additional information for a journalist. Our third recommendation selected by readers is to watch the neighbourhood. So, as you know, of course, there is bad science out there and there is bad science reporting. And we've got figures in the community like Ben Goldacre and Dorothy Bishop who are very vocal in criticising bad science and bad science reporting, but we contend that more scientists need to take an active role in this respect, whether it's through the PCC or whatever version of the PCC we end up with, whether it's directly in the press, in the news, or whether it's via our blog articles. It's very important. Now, interestingly, we asked scientists in our survey who they tend to blame when they see misreporting in the press. And not surprisingly, perhaps, most of them assigned that responsibility to newspapers, but it's very important here for us as scientists to determine the source of error before we point the finger, to really look out for this very carefully, because evidence shows that this is not always the case, that in fact, as I said earlier, half the time perhaps the responsibility could lie with a press release or perhaps an uncautious quote that the scientist made rather than hyperbole added by the journalist. So to conclude really on that point, it's very important that as scientists we summon the courage to do this and to get into the public more often and to really criticise and critique what we see as bad science, because ultimately bad science and pseudoscience have no better ally than silence from good scientists. So there are 3 points, and that's going to raise, I think, quite a bit of discussion on its own. But as part of this evening, we also have been asked to provide 3 questions for journalists and editors. And this is where I'll go and put my riot gear on and get the rotten tomatoes ready. But here they come. So our questions for journalists and editors. Firstly, to what extent do science journalists feel influenced by the social and political agendas of their newspapers? How do they respond to such pressures, and how should scientists? Our second question, motivated in part by an excellent report by Dr. Andy Williams from the School of Journalism in Cardiff. Do science journalists generally feel that their workload is too high? And furthermore, to editors, we would add, would a daily newspaper suffer if it concentrated on fewer stories but in greater depth? And finally, the corker. And I'm going to, before I raise this question, I'm just going to to preface it by saying that it's a point that's been suggested to us not just by scientists, but also by journalists. How would journalists and editors view a criterion-based quality stamp or kite mark for science news reporting? And I'll just finish on a lighter note by announcing the award for the most entertaining rant on our Guardian pages underneath in the comments goes to a reader, Millie Bungler, who left this fantastic comment that in reference to tonight's debate, that this dog and pony show will do nothing worthwhile because you are trying to treat a rotting, festering, week-old corpse for the cold it had before it died. And Ananyo, I thought, responded beautifully to this. That's terrifically constructive. And I think that really emphasizes what we want to achieve tonight. Actually, we do want to achieve something productive and constructive. So roll on the dog and pony show. And I look forward to discussing further. Thank you.
Ananyo, do you want to take the lectern? You haven't got slides. You're going to...
No. This is my PowerPoint presentation, sorry. It doesn't plug in. Thanks very much to Chris for a very, very constructive talk. Thank you. Yes, we are overworked, and I do need more holidays. Thank you. So, okay, I would like to start with a short digression, if I could. A tale of two tabloids, or two newspapers, however you want to view them. The first one is the second biggest in terms of print circulation in Britain. It does have very good science correspondents, at least that's what their colleagues think. And if copy should be produced by a non-specialist, then often they will get to see it and their opinions are taken seriously. Now, though this newspaper is much maligned and misunderstood, the coverage that it does of science is actually, on closer inspection, pretty good. Now, the second newspaper is an online powerhouse. It has the second biggest online presence of any newspaper. It's behind the New York Times only in the world, and it's gaining fast. It has a single science correspondent. I'm told that he's not incredibly experienced, but they churn out science stories by the dozen. The copy that their freelancers and that non-specialists produce for that website doesn't go past their specialist correspondent. And even if it did, he'd be far too busy to actually check it. Now, many of you may have realized that I'm actually talking about one newspaper here, and that newspaper is the Daily Mail. In print and online, the first newspaper being the print version. If the prospect of the Mail Online becoming the most popular news site in the world fills you with horror, then I have some news. They want more science. They don't want less. They want more science because they want hits, and science is universally liked and enjoyed, whether the person be in America or whether they be in Moldova. Whereas British politics is not of much interest to American readers. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, it's because when we discuss how to improve science journalism later on, we must understand how things are and how they will be. Print is dead. I'm not just saying that because I'm online editor. It's in terminal decline. Hits and traffic is what online editors are judged by, and that won't change. So I think when we think about our criticisms and so on, we must think a little bit about the harried online editor and the equally harried online reporter. And let's try and frame some recommendations in that light. And while I'm pessimistic about my own contribution to this debate in terms of my recommendations, what I am very confident about is that you as scientists and you as consumers of science media can make a huge difference to science journalism. So with that, I'm going to talk about my recommendations for science journalists, and there's 3 of them, as there was for Chris. One is that we need to encourage, and we being specialist correspondents, desk reporters and online editors to pass them copy. And we also need to get desk editors to take their comments more seriously. That would, I think, help to stem a lot of the trash journalism that we see. The second is that everybody needs to bear in mind, and specialist correspondents know this already, is that the press release, the quote from a lead researcher, or the paper, that's not the final word of a story. That should never be so. It's what you start with. My third point, and it's one that nearly everybody suggested, both on the Guardian piece and via Twitter and so on, but it's one that I was kind of reluctant to bring up. It was a suggestion that everybody, at least all journalists, need a stats course. The reason I'm reluctant to bring that one up is that I'm not convinced that this one applies uniquely to science journos. I think everybody could use a stats course, not me, please. And I think that this is kind of a reflection of Ben Goldacre's influence on this debate. So on to my questions for scientists. And one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of debate often revolves around health reporting. So I want to know from all of you and the scientists in the audiences, are all areas of science journalism equally culpable? And, you know, are any newspapers doing a good job, or any magazines doing a good job? Are there any tabloids in particular that you think, you know, that you've deigned to pick up and that you think are doing a good job? Because we want to know what we can learn from that. Secondly, is science special? And by that, do I mean that is science journalism, you know, do we have a particularly difficult time of it in comparison to other areas? Is there something unique about science that makes science hard to report? Is reporting about faster-than-light neutrinos any harder than reporting about quantitative easing? And then lastly, my third point is, to what extent is it the duty of scientists to speak to the press? And if it's not, should it be? Okay, thank you very much.
So we've had a scientist talking about what the recommendations for scientists are, and questions for journalists, and a journalist saying recommendation for journalists and what their questions for scientists are. Before we get on to our 2 sort of digestion pieces, I was thinking it would be good to know a bit about the people in the room and whether you identify as one of these 2 groups or something else, because I am not and have never been either a scientist or a journalist, and I'm sure there are other people like this. So if you can put your hand up more than once, but if you could say, are you a scientist? Chris, put your hand up. No? Okay, that's fair. Are you a journalist? Would you call yourself a science writer? Are you a press officer? Are you something else? Well, we're all something else too, I guess. Okay, it was good to get a feel for that. I think that we were all, when we were talking about it earlier, we were all saying, I wonder who's going to calm them, what their feelings are. So it was good just to know that. All right, so we've got 2 digestion pieces, just some sort of thoughts to start thinking about other recommendations maybe, some responses to these recommendations and questions, just another point of view to keep us going. And we're going to start off with Fiona Fox from the Science Media Centre.
Okay, well, I got sight of these yesterday evening, so I've had a bit of advance notice, and I've jotted down a few points, so I'm just going to read these out because I haven't got much time and I have loads to say. I'm also going to be really cheeky and make some general points from the SMC first before I get on to the points made, in case I don't get a chance to say them later. Number one, points to Ananyo's point anyway, which is editors and sub-editors need to defer to specialists on every single science story. We have been advocating that for 10 years since we worked out that that is the answer. Every time a science journalist does it, it is written better. The provocative bit of that is the headline, because I keep being told by journalists, forget it, Fiona, forget it, get over yourself. They don't go out in daylight hours, they start working at 10, we leave at 7, that is not going to happen. I think that should happen. I think sub-editors and editors should defer to the science journalists on the headline. Two, I think it's great, this actually comes from Simon, who's a volunteer with us at the moment. It's great to seek areas of agreement, but we're different. Scientists and journalists are different, and I don't want us to merge. So I don't like your project at all, Alok. Don't want to walk out of here with areas of agreement. I think science and news, people go on about they don't make great bedfellows. I don't think we should make great bedfellows. We can have fun, we can flirt, we can have a bit of foreplay, but I don't think we should get into bed with each other because what we both do is special and we need to just somehow adapt one to the other. Three, message from Tony Blair was education. Message from Fiona Fox and the SMC, engage. Everything that's happened in the last 10 years of the SMC has not come from complaining, going to the PCC, even writing blogs complaining, but getting stuck in. When scientists get stuck in, when they engage with the media, they change what the media reports through what they say and how they say it. And that really still remains the most powerful way of improving the quality of science reporting that I know of. Four, on the debate over whether journalists or scientists are ultimately responsible, what I call the Dacre toilet debate, my heart goes with Ananyo and Ed, but my head goes with Chris and Petrock. I agree that journalists can check, but I'm going to wager you now £100 that the vast majority of science reporters will not agree that their role is to, as I think Ed said, ask questions and deflate exaggeration. I just don't think they see that as their role. It's to entertain and sell papers. I think they also have specified, and I hate this, which is why my heart goes with Ed, they have specified that their role is to report what is said. And if a decent scientist is saying something in a decent journal, written up in a decent press release, and they're saying it's a cure or a breakthrough or a massive leap forward, they will report that. And they won't go and interrogate it and question it, they will report it. And I do want to bet you £100 that the majority, I'm not saying everyone, there are journalists in this room who do see their job as a journalist to go and do journalism, but there are many who see their jobs as reporters. And I think scientists need to live with that because that is where the trend is going and we need to be a bit realistic about that. On to specifics. So start with Chris's points. Watch what you release. Yes, there is a whole chain in this story. Everybody in that chain has to take some responsibility. And I'm with Chris on the fact that the ones that we can influence, we don't have any influence in any newsroom. We've been trying for 10 years, but we still actually don't have much influence. We do have influence with the scientific community and with science press officers, and I think that's absolutely critical that we all take our responsibilities seriously. Think blog. All of you know how much I love blogs. How much I love the blogosphere, I know you do. I love what Ed does. Dorothy Bishop is my absolute top favourite blogger at the moment, but I think you're very naive, Chris, if you think that the wider public or many journalists are going to go to the blog to get the full story. I don't think journalists will do that. They'll go to the press release. If they're good journalists, they'll go to the paper. I don't think they're going to go a step further and read a lengthy blog in order to find the true story. So blogs are fantastic, and what's happening on the blogosphere is interesting and innovative, but it's not getting to a mass audience, so it's not a substitute for the mass media. Challenge bad science, yes, but be careful how you do it. Really, I've seen it done very, very badly in a way that puts off every science journalist, puts off editors, and I still believe that engaging is better than complaining. And 10 years ago, there was a culture of complaint. I think it's changing, and I'd hate to go back to everybody being armed with their PCC code and making formal complaints. Questions, what extent do journalists feel influenced by political line of the paper? Well, I think they're influenced by what their news editors want, and their news editors are influenced by what they think their audience audience wants and what their readers want. And I think scientists need to be sensitive to that. I don't think there's any point yelling at Fiona McRae, who is the brilliant science editor on the Daily Mail, for writing up a study shows that childcare is bad for your brain. Because she'd probably be sacked if she missed that study. She really would be. And then we'd lose one of our best science reporters on the Daily Mail, and where would we be? So I think we need to be a little bit realistic about this. There is an agenda on papers, but it's not necessarily a political agenda, apart from on climate change, with the Telegraph and various papers. It's quite often, this is what our readers want. And we can't influence that. So I think it'd be very naive as scientists to dictate that shouldn't happen. Should papers do... are you timing me? 30 seconds. Should papers do less better? Well, yes, of course they should. Some have openly come out and said they're going to. The Times has made a point that they're going to do much more original reporting, be less wedded to the diary. And then you've got David Shulman, new science editor of the BBC, who's come out very publicly and said, we take the point that Steve Jones made in the Trust Review. We too are going to be less wedded to the diary. We'll see if this happens. But lots of other papers, it's going exactly the opposite direction. Go and speak to Jane Kirby from PA or Fiona. They have to do more stories than ever. And again, I think we really need to get real on this. They're doing a lot more stories. We need to help them do a lot more stories better, and that's what the SMC does literally on a daily basis. How would reporters see a kite mark? Like a cup of cold sick. I love Chris and Petrarch. I really love their style, everything. I love being ambitious, but they're not going to go for this. Although I said that several times, and then Dacre stands up at Leveson and talks about some kind of licensing. So let's be ambitious, but I can tell you that kite marks have not gone down well with anyone I know. I think I need to shut up, which means I haven't said anything about Ananyo. I have loads to say, but maybe they'll take me back in later.
The idea of the kite mark is a kind of cold tip. And now we have Ed Yong, who apparently kind of identifies as a journalist. Freelancer. Tree-lancer? World famous for his award-winning, not exactly rocket science blog. Anyway, Ed.
Okay, I've got lots of points as well, so just stop me when I get to 5 minutes. I've tried to weave a sort of cohesive structure out of these because, hey, journalist. We've talked a lot about some quite specific solutions, like getting people to go on stats courses. And I think that might help, but I think a lot of the problems that science journalism experiences aren't really to do with science specifically, but are to do with journalism full stop. They're big systemic and cultural problems that are not unique to science. So someone mentioned workload. I do hear that everyone is under too much pressure, both in time and the amount they have to do. To some extent, I don't quite buy that as an excuse or a reason to explain some of the failings that we've also talked about, because I also see a lot of journalists who do a really good job and have equal amounts of time pressure. So I don't see that as, I don't accept that as a seriously major explanation. One thing I did want to raise as a systemic problem is this issue of accountability. Fiona's mentioned this already. I think in Chris's presentation, he talks about asking scientists where they would assign blame for bad stories. And I think that there's a certain falseness in that question, because it assumes that accountability is some sort of zero-sum game, that blame can be apportioned to one particular party. My personal feeling on this is that if, as a journalist, we screw up a report, if we report something that is misleading, it doesn't matter whether the origin of that came from a quote in a press release, from something a scientist said, or from something an editor stuck in. If it's all work, our job is to correct those sorts of things. It's to spot and analyse. It is not just to report what people said. So I'm not going to take Fiona's bet, because I think she's right. I think that most people won't agree to that, and frankly, as a freelancer, I can't afford to lose £100. But I think that's a problem. I think that is a problem, because I don't think that just reporting what people say, accepting those quotes that are handed to us, is journalism. I think it's stenography, and I think that it's a problem if we have come to accept that level of, frankly, mediocrity as the sort of standard par for the course. I think we need to do better, and I think we need to acknowledge that we can do better. I think one way of doing that is by paying attention to the very rich discussion that's going on around us. I think Chris is absolutely right in suggesting that more scientists should blog, but that would only help if more people pay attention to it. And I think people should pay attention to it. We talked about getting people to do stats courses. Okay, that's going to do great. That's going to be really great for improving the quality of medical or health reporting. But every single field of science has its own particular little bugbears. It's got its own little mistakes which keep on cropping up in news stories. Whether it's evolution or genetics or neuroscience, any scientist in these areas can say, okay, here are the things that always happen in news pieces that really annoy me. It's easy to find those out if you're paying attention, if you're looking at blogs, if you're talking to people on Twitter. And frankly, I think there is no excuse not to, other than the time thing, but we have kind of talked about that. I think the wrong attitude is to look at these critiques and discussions and think, okay, that's just scientists being pissy and trying to get us to rework our copies so no one can understand it. I think it's an important part of becoming a better journalist. I feel that I have learned a tremendous amount just by talking to people and looking at the reactions to news pieces as much as actually writing them myself. So I think it is important to pay attention to those reactions and the responses to your pieces as much as it is to actually produce them in the first place. And I think scientists can help by engaging more with journalists rather than just putting content out there into the ether and then leaving it. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people say, I can't believe that problem's turning up again, because I blogged that last month. Like, why isn't it sorted now? Well, it's sorted because you just blogged that and you didn't tell anyone else about it, or you had some snarky conversations on Twitter and that was that. So I think there are different ways forward. Certainly reaching out to journalists, talking to them more directly, but also I think trying to be a bit more constructive about it. So rather than just, you did that wrong, how could you do that better? I've been talking to some neuroscientists on Twitter for ages about trying to put together a guide of how to look at a neuroscience story and the obvious things that can clue you into something a little bit dodgy. Because we have those for, like, medical stories because of the good works of people like Ben Goldacre. And I think it's got to the point where an amateur who's sort of paying attention can take apart an epidemiological paper and work out whether what the problems are. But that sort of stuff doesn't exist for a lot of other fields. And I think a sort of constructive guide to common problems would be really helpful, as an example. And I think that's it. Did I have anything else to say? All right, one final point. Everyone here, I assume, is interested in this issue. Like, we care, right? We want to make it better. We want to fix things. What about the people who don't? What about the people who aren't here? As Alok said, the last time this discussion came up, I lamented the fact that this is just good journalists and good scientists butting heads against each other again, while the other people who are the problem are just down the pub. And I still think that's true. So how are you going to get people who aren't in this room and who frankly don't care and who don't do this kind of odd level of introspection that science journalism seems to have? How do you get them to take part in this discussion and to give a shit? You know, not like the Aloks or the Ian Samples or whatever, but like the Daily Mail reporter. Who names their child that, really? But how do you get them to take part in this discussion? That's what I want to know.